Right, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. It's Koza Kanji. I'm the editor of VOD Professional, and welcome to OTT Question Time 3. Today, we are talking about the pandemic and the advertising paradox. We're talking basically about what's going on with linear and OTT advertising since the lockdown started. Joining me on the panel today are...
Siotis, President for SpotX Europe.
Simon Thomas, Global Director for Audiences Research at GroupM.
And I am Alan Wolk. I am the co-founder and lead analyst at TVREV in the US.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And can you tell us actually what you all do as well? I know you said President and Global Director of Audiences and Research, yeah, and TVREV Analyst. Yeah. What's your expertise? Why are you on this panel? Other than me asking you very nicely, obviously. Yeah.
Of course, I guess I'll start. So SpotX is a video management platform. We work with content owners, media owners, helping them manage and monetize their video assets. And we have a strong focus on OTT. So I'd imagine that would be why I got the call up today, because we're talking about kind of all things OTT.
Yeah.
It's Simon Thomas at GroupM. GroupM, for those that don't know, is the WPP media investment arm. About 1/3 of the world's advertising billings go through our media agencies. We have sister agencies who are the brand agencies. So Wunderman Thompson, VML, Y&R. Within GroupM, we have Mindshare, Mediacom, Wavemaker, Essence, and M6. We cover all categories. We cover all countries, basically. I've been involved with TV since the 1980s. TV audience measurement data and consumer insight data, and that's what I do now. But it's not just about TV, it's about video and total video. And I've been very, very close to a lot of the projects that are ongoing to try and establish some consistent audio visual measurement so that we can get maximum benefit out of our clients' advertising investments and advise them accordingly.
And Alan?
Yes, and so TVREV is an analyst firm. We cover sort of the intersection of OTT and advertising. We do reports on various topics. We have just finished one recently on addressable TV advertising, on OTT, ad-supported OTT. We're working on stuff on local. I have a book called Over the Top, How the Internet is Slowly but Surely Changing the Television Industry. That's on Amazon. It's used as a textbook in a lot of schools in the US, like USC. And, you know, we sort of hopefully have our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the US industry. We also have a website, TVREV.com, where we have a lot of experts, not just ourselves in the industry, putting out articles and predictions and all that kind of good stuff.
Can I have it noted, please? The book plug went in at 3 minutes 50. Nice one, Alan.
Okay, very good.
Actually, Simon, you say that. I was about to ask you, who invented the term total video?
Well, it came up in a conversation quite a long time ago. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
A number of people.
A number of people, including you, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Allegedly.
Lots of people are tuning in, we can see, via the webinar itself. So audience, hello. If you want to ask a question at any point, then obviously there's the Q&A option. But also I will temporarily upgrade you to a panelist so that you can ask your question with video and in person as well. So if you have any questions, start putting them in Q&A. Let's get to the point of this, which is that the big sort of advertising paradox that I mentioned in the title, which is that since these various national lockdowns started, TV and OTT viewing has gone that way, whereas advertising revenue, particularly linear revenue, has gone in the opposite direction. So what's going on? In the first instance, can I ask you all to really give us your understanding of how the land lies at the moment? Yeah. And by the way, Simon is kind of nominally our UK guy here. Leon is going to be talking about Europe, yeah, and Alan, of course, the States. So Simon, if we start with you, closest to home.
Yep. It's an interesting situation in that, of course, the UK is different to many, many other countries because we have the BBC as a public broadcaster, which doesn't carry any advertising. So that is that always has been highly disrupted in terms of the commercial broadcasters' audience figures. With the additions of Netflix and Prime over a number of years, that's also had a further disruption of commercial impacts, ratings, and audiences. What's happened is there has been a phenomenal swing to the sort of the comfort and to the information and to the entertainment of the television screen, however the premium content may be being delivered. And I think, and this will be a recurring theme for me, one of the problems we have is we can't measure it properly. There is too much unmeasured. But in terms of the measured environment, whether that be measured by the BARB, television audience measurement, metered system, or measured through set-top box return path data, or other means, the measurement is showing double-digit, and in some cases, for example, for ITV On Demand on their hub, 75% week-on-week increases. My5, Channel 5's On Demand, similar. iPlayer has gone through the roof, but also linear ratings have gone up as well, particularly around the news channels. In the UK, we call the BBC Auntie. It's called Auntie BBC. And that goes all the way back to the 1930s and through the Second World War, which of course tomorrow will be celebrating VE Day. But the point being is that relationship that the BBC has with the population, I think, is quite incredible. Just to digress for 1 second, and please shut me up when you want to, Kate. There was a lot of pressure, and there seemed to be a political will to actually take the public license fee away and turn the BBC into a far more commercial organisation. I think this crisis and what has happened with the population turning to the BBC as a trusted location for them to get their information, to get their comfort, to get their entertainment, has probably thrown that completely out into the long grass. I can't see the government bringing that back. But to the point about the commercial side, yeah, I mean, commercial impacts, ratings up through the roof, absolutely. However, it's not a supply side environment. Minutage is regulated because so the supply of the minutage within the commercial broadcasting environment is limited. Therefore, the demand part of the equation, i.e. the advertiser demand, is the key driver. And that has initially fallen off a cliff. We've had a lot of advertisers go in, and I'm now talking generally. None of this is about any of our specific clients. Yeah. Where I will mention a client, it's because it's in the public domain. Most advertisers went into a complete quick survival mode. Some of them are still there. Obviously, people like the airlines, travel companies, tourist boards, really difficult situation. Automobile manufacturers and dealers have seen their business virtually stop. That's a big problem for them. But other businesses have then looked at the situation and come out of survival mode quite quickly. I mean, Procter & Gamble making a global statement on that, based on experience in the previous 2008, 2009 recession, from the dot-com bubble bursting in the early noughties, going back, and I'm now going back, we're going back into the recessions of the 80s, and indeed the oil crisis of the mid-70s, which is when I started work. You know, I've been through all those recessions, and the same thing happens, is you will find the bigger and more resilient companies will realize that they've got to spend through the recession. Okay. What has happened this time, different to last time, is I think this is a global impact. That's never happened before, because it's been a regional impact in most cases. And the big problem we've now got is because of the diversification of the global consumerist society, global supply lines, global companies looking for global brands, two things have happened. One is that support from a like of a P&G, and Unilever have done the same, saying that they will continue to support brand alongside the short term. Other companies, particularly in the D2C area, direct to consumer, have gone short, very, very short term, and there was already a problem with that anyway. They weren't necessarily investing in brand. And then finally, the fact that an awful lot of the categories that I've just mentioned, two categories I've just mentioned, travel and automobiles, for example, have just stopped spending.
Yeah.
Now, the problem the commercial companies have, the commercial TV companies have, is those clients have an annual commitment to them. They have some form of pricing and volume contract, and they can defer. They can ask for cancellation, or they can ask for total withdrawal of budget. And I think the interesting thing that I've seen happen over probably the last 2 weeks is our wonderful industry, and people knock it sometimes, but the great thing is there are people talking together on all sides of the business, on the advertiser, agency, and vendor side, whether that be commercial broadcasters or elsewhere, at how can we all working together get through this issue?
Yeah.
So where can we reduce barriers? But there is a lot of competition. As we know, linear TV was losing viewers.
Yeah.
There have been a number of disruptive changes in the marketplace. There are some incredibly good organizations out there doing some very good work.
Yeah.
Yes, we see reports about other issues to do with ad tech, but let's put that to one side for today.
Yeah.
And there has been a massive growth, and what I had tagged as the streaming wars, and other people did as well, coming through. Personally, I thought Disney was going to whoop Netflix arse, quite frankly. Now it looks the other way around. And Disney are taking an enormous hit on their main business, particularly their theme parks.
Yeah.
Whereas they're doing extremely well with their subscriptions. So we've got all of this going on at the same time, an enormous amount of disruption. But the way I look at it is, which way is the tide going? And at the moment, the tide's going out, the money's going out. Q3, Q4, I have to agree with my old boss, Sir Martin, who said this. I think Q3 will see a little bit of a resurgence. Q4, there will be a big resurgence.
Simon, you've actually answered all the questions, through the whole panel, in one shot. Yeah, but we will come back to lots.
Come back to London. What's there?
What I was most interested in actually out of the many things that you said, was that there's an institutional memory for some of the biggest advertisers because they've been through this before.
Correct.
Good. Okay, fine. By the way, backing up what you just said about linear broadcasters losing share, advertising share, and of course viewers. This is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for quite a while. I'm just going to quickly share a screen with you that I've got.
Oh, that's sneaky.
Yeah. So this is the. No, wrong one. Yeah, I've shared the wrong thing. How do I get you back? Right. You can tell that I'm practiced at this.
Good thing it was just your website, man. It could have been.
I was going to say, good advertising plug.
Yeah, I love Zoom. Right, so can you see this graph here, this chart?
Yes.
So I was doing a bit of research for a company last year. I was writing a report for them, in fact, and this is part of the research that I did. So in it, I said that actually broadcaster revenue was holding up pretty well up until 2018. So I looked at the revenues of 10 different broadcasters around Europe and the States. And you can see that on average, there's the revenue increase across those 6 years. So broadcasters were doing pretty well, particularly the ones that were diversifying. The problem was, however, that linear ad revenues were on the decline. And actually, the big outlier there is the Discovery number of 34% rise over those years. But actually, that's because of acquisition of scripts. So if that hadn't happened, then the negative number here, the average decrease, would be much, much greater. And Leon, we're going to come to you in a second. When it comes to digital revenues, they are certainly climbing, but they haven't yet been climbing quickly enough to bridge the gap. So actually, on that note, let's go to Leon. And Leon, what's your read on the market? What are you hearing about Europe and particularly OTT advertising?
Definitely. I mean, what I find so fascinating about the current situation is, as everybody says, it's unprecedented. However, the outcome seems to be, in a sense, extremely predictable. So if you had described the current pandemic and said everyone's going to be stuck at home and no one's going to be allowed to fly, and you kind of ask someone to kind of scope the impact, you would say naturally people are going to be consuming more television, more content. Advertisers are going to drop out. If you can't fly, then clearly the whole travel sector disappears. And, kind of unsurprisingly, that's actually exactly what we've seen. So kind of touching on your point about what's the, that correlation between kind of advertising dollars as well as actual kind of supply or, amount of hours consumed. And it's been, kind of really predictable, and the data's backed it up, which is interesting. It's one of these things where you kind of want to see an outlier. You want to see something kind of go against the norm, but actually it's kind of all played out relatively predictably. From a European standpoint, I think what we've really looked at as well is kind of seeing when people kind of took specific actions with relation to, kind of to COVID. So once you put your country in quarantine, once you kind of asked specific shops to shut down, when you canceled sports, and you could kind of see, you could almost predict what was going to happen in the UK from an advertising standpoint based off of, what was happening in Italy a few weeks before that. I mean, not exactly, I'd say in the kind of OTT AVOD space, the UK is kind of probably more progressive. There's more services. It's the first point of call for many of the larger, kind of US companies, because from a content standpoint, of course, it's English, English content's the easiest to get a hold of, and therefore it's easy to kind of launch in that market. However, if you kind of look across Europe, you've seen, increases in, in AVOD viewership across the board, and yet you're definitely seeing a struggle to drive the demand across it. I think one of the areas some of these new companies, one of the advantages they've kind of have is, in a time when there's so much uncertainty and such an inability to plan longer term, being able to benefit from kind of very reactive budgets, things that are coming into the market pretty quickly, I think has been quite helpful for a lot of the kind of new entrants. And that's where the kind of digitalization and kind of bringing in, programmatic accessibility, I think has been really helpful for the OTT companies.
Yeah. So is BVOD going to be okay? AVOD for broadcasters, sorry, this year?
I mean, it depends on how we define okay. I think yes. I mean, from a viewership perspective, I think what you've seen is an acceleration of what were pre-existing trends, and that's probably what you've seen across the board. What things that you would probably have predicted to have happened in 2021 or by 2022 were just accelerated by everybody kind of being, at home, discovering new services, trying to find new content to watch, and, starting to explore perhaps some of the features on that TV set that you didn't know existed before, hitting some of those buttons that you didn't bother with historically, but you got a little more time now, so you figure you'll have a play around. And also a lot of these companies have kind of accelerated some of their content plans to get more and more things in front of their users, in front of consumers, knowing that there's an appetite for, for content at this point. So I think there's, companies are in a very strong place with regards to, user behavior. And I think it's inevitable that the advertising dollars will catch up eventually. But, it is a pretty difficult time, because even if you have a product, of course, right, that you can, that people want, getting it to getting it to the consumer is hard enough. So it's not even as simple as, do I have, am I able to sell people something, and can I actually get it into their hands in a reasonable amount of time? So I think you'll see, people kind of sit on dollars until that changes and the market starts to recover a bit.
Yeah. As part of the research for this, I'm just about to share a link actually in the chat area. I read a report by Wolk and the Advertising Association, and in it, one of the standout things for me was that it said that, I mean, it predicts that TV linear advertising is going to see a 19.8% dip, and VOD, so AVOD in other words, is going to see a dip of 6.3%. That was surprising to me, but this is specifically the UK we're talking about here. But I shared that link in case you want to read it as well. Alan, I will come to you. Simon's got his hand up.
Yeah, very short, and I promise I will be. To Leon's point, I mean, yes, and it always has been, the dollars or the pounds will follow the eyeballs. But I think the world's changed. And one of my big beefs I have is, unless the vendor makes it easy to conduct a transaction, then the dollars won't necessarily follow. And I won't mention any individual companies, but the growth of certain addressable and programmatic capabilities with the appropriate audience measurement to report back to the client, their total video exposure, reach, frequency, and effectiveness and outcomes creates a far more opportunistic environment than some areas where perhaps the challenge is stuck within the old sales team structure within the vendor. That's number one. And the second point is there are still clients who divide their budgets into linear television, BVOD, and the internet.
Most do. Most do.
Alan, going for you. I mean, there's two questions I have. The same question to you: what's going on in the States? So that's the first one, and then once you answer that, I'll ask the second one.
Okay, so we'll start off with what's going on in the States. So just because I'm assuming most of the audience here is European, a little bit of setup on what the U.S. market looks like now. So we are in the middle of what we've been calling the Flixcopolis, which is the launch of all these giant multi-billion-dollar streaming services. So you had Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu already. Then just before all this started, you had the launch of Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus. In the middle of it, you had the launch of Peacock, which is NBCU Comcast big streaming service, sort of a soft launch. They kind of got screwed a little bit. They were going to do the hard launch around the Summer Olympics, which they had rights to. You had Quibi, which is that streaming, sort of short form streaming service. And then on top of that, you have another group of companies that we refer to in the States as the FAST, the free ad-supported streaming TV services. Now, the success of these properties, all of which have recently, the three main ones have all recently been bought by big conglomerates, really took the industry by surprise because they have two things going on. It's mostly older library content, basically things that movies and older hit movies from the 80s and 90s, or TV shows that Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu didn't buy the rights to. And a couple of them, Pluto, which is the most successful one, Pluto is now owned by Viacom, introduced something very akin to linear channels, where they would take a bunch of content around a specific topic and create a linear stream around it, so you could watch it almost like old school TV. And it actually, in the latest update of Pluto, you can actually click from one stream to another, which has always been an odd thing about streaming, and actually sort of at some level probably to the detriment of advertisers, because previously you were forced to watch the commercial. Now you can sort of click through. But those services have become very popular. Now, to something you were saying before, people are starting to sort of mess around with their TVs and figure out. And one of the things about these FASTs is that part of the reason they were so successful is that they struck deals with the TV OEM, with Vizio, LG, and Samsung.
Yes,
and I'm hearing.
Really sorry about your daughter.
I'm hearing other voices.
It's Pluto.
That was Pluto. That was Pluto, I'm afraid.
Pluto
Sorry.
on Simon's.
on my pad.
Anyway, so anyway, I was saying that they embedded all the various OEMs on the TV sets, and people are finding them that way. And then they're also embedded on the streaming devices. So all of that is a preamble to what's going on in the States now, which is that streaming has gone up tremendously. Now, Simon was saying, you were saying before that measurement is difficult, and it's difficult in the States too. So you see a range of numbers, from Nielsen, which is measuring, Nielsen is sort of the Barb equivalent in the US, is measuring that way. And then you have other services like Inscape, which is owned by Vizio, uses ACR data. When that is automatic content recognition, basically they've got about 13 million smart TVs where people have opted in and say, yes, you can track what you're watching. And sort of the beauty of ACR is that you can track it regardless of what the source is. So long as it's on the glass, whether it's over the air, whether it's in a cable set-top box, or whether it's streaming, you can sort of tell what they're watching. Now, average is that streaming has been up somewhere like 70% or something like that. Nielsen stat that I have, Counselor asked me, said that the streaming video was 654 billion versus 301 billion last year. And that's pretty huge. We've seen that number at about 70-75% overall increase. And then for linear, there's been an increase, but it hasn't been as much. And the feeling is it's mostly limited to news services, that people are tuning in for the news and to sort of find out. It's helped local broadcasters a lot too. So in the US, we have this weird system too, where in addition to sort of the national broadcasters, you have all these local stations, and somebody could go on mute. There's all these local stations. Now, one of the things there's a law in the U.S. that the main broadcasters can only own 39% of the local broadcasters that sort of subscribe to their service. You have all these independent companies, and that's how that system is laid out. And they've all been doing, they all basically built their business on doing local news, and that's been huge because everything in the U.S. has become very local as it's sort of been delegated down to the governors and the mayors and whatnot. And then the other thing, of course, in the U.S. is that you are not, advertising is down. It's exactly what's happening in Europe. Advertising is an easy thing to cut when you feel, because you don't have to fire anybody when a company is feeling financial pressure. It's an interesting stat from iSpot, which is a company we work with. iSpot sort of measures commercial activity throughout the U.S. and all that, and among other things. And they have found that the categories that were sort of up in this period, sort of March, April, were insurance, specialty retail, weight loss, food delivery, and credit reporting, all of which are things you would expect people would be interested in now. And obviously the big pullback is anything in the travel and tourism industry. So that's sort of where we're at now. A lot of the streaming services are offering free deals or free come-ons to try and get people to sign up. But there's a lot of, and not all of the streaming services are completely subscription, right? So among the Flixes, you have, Hulu has an ad-supported version that's much cheaper. So will HBO Max, Peacock. So you're starting to see that and the FAST, which were completely free, they're just ad-supported, as being something that as the economy sort of goes south, we're going to see a lot more uptake from those. And then the question will be is, how many of these services do people take going forward versus what people thought they might have taken, 6 months ago?
There's an awful lot to unpack in there. We won't be able to do it in this session. But one thing you did mention was actually about the different industry sectors, that are advertising versus are not advertising at the moment. You touched on it at least. I'm going to share my screen again just for a second, and this time I got it ready. This is an interesting chart that I pulled off the Commission for the CEBR. I've totally forgotten what it stands for, but it basically shows the amount of output that has been lost in different industries in the UK since the lockdown started. And interestingly, and most importantly, the arts, entertainment and recreation section has lost 81% of its output during the lockdown. I just thought that was an interesting stat in terms of asking you the next question, which is, who is advertising versus who is not advertising? By the way, we'll need to make this a short round answer, just because we're already at 4:30 and we've still got another 3 questions to explore. Simon, let's start with you again.
It is, Alan's just flagged up the obvious ones. I flagged up the ones that are not advertising earlier. What I would say is the companies that have a longer term strategy and are not in a firefighting survival mood are the ones that are advertising. Some are adapting with some short term creative ideas, and some of it's been quite brilliant. And other companies are looking at the opportunity and pivoting. Mondelez, for example, home snacking has become a major thing because people are at home. And so they're facilitating that, particularly with the growth of e-commerce. So with all of that that's going on, I think, and certainly over the last week or so, what I've begun to detect is a lot more objective and strategic thought as to where the low-hanging fruit is in terms of sales, and also following that up then with the maintenance, particularly with the major clients like P&G and Unilever, again quoted in the public domain, where they are supporting their brands. But there's a lot of short-termism. There's a lot of loss of what I would call traditional brand equity, linear television advertising going on. There's an awful lot of D2C growing, and it's across all categories.
And which are the biggest non-advertisers? I mean, you mentioned retail, travel.
Well, it's primarily travel and tourism, and we're seeing I've noticed a big drop in automobile advertising,
Right.
Cars.
Leon, what's going on online?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very similar story. There was an initial kind of surge in automotive right at the beginning, and then that completely disappeared by the kind of last week of March. Similarly, a lot of digital brands. You do have some of the, we'll go with sin brands coming in, being online gambling, but specifically around poker and things like that, of course, because there's no sports in play. So that, from a European standpoint, I guess maybe not so much in the US, since they're much stricter with regards to what you can advertise in that space. So kind of exactly who you'd expect. And you do see brands coming in almost, it's kind of like almost overnight. So a lot of short-term planning, as Simon mentioned, they kind of put together a great kind of creative and then get to market quickly. And that touches on, Simon's point. I couldn't agree more with regards to, pounds or dollars following eyeballs, only if the broadcasters, only if the, kind of media owners are making it easy to capture and to spend with them. And that's why it is really so important to ensure that, it's not a kind of overly cumbersome process, because otherwise, that money will go elsewhere.
Alan, it's mirrored in the States, this picture?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned who was advertising a lot before, and then, it's the same, automobile, travel, and tourism are pulling out. Two things, though, of interest. One is this is a big political year in the U.S. It's not just a presidential election, it's congressional elections and state legislatures. So there will be a huge uptick in spending for politics, and whether that sort of allows a lot of the local broadcasters and also the networks to break even remains to be seen. There's a feeling that it will, because political ad spending may go up because people can't do live campaigning. So that's and it will obviously not go. They were expecting a boom year this year, and at best they may break even. Yeah. The other stat that's kind of fascinating is, this is also from iSpot, is that there are in the March-April period, there were 25.6% more brands advertising on television than there had been in the same period the year before. So there's been a huge uptick in the number of brands who are actually looking to TV, and the best guess is that they are both a combination of DTC brands who have realized, okay, we've hit everybody we can on Instagram. And if we want to seem bigger, if we want to start taking on the Procter & Gamble's, we do need to move to TV, because that's going to make us seem bigger. And that at the same time, a lot of them have been advertising on digital video. So they actually have the creative already produced, so it's easy for them to get onto TV. That's often the biggest struggle, is somebody who's been running banner ads suddenly has to do, a television commercial, and they have no idea how to do it. They're, blown away by how much it costs. So if they already have YouTube ads, it's easy for them to run them on TV. And with everything that's been going bad about digital, with all the, the fraud and the brand safety issues, a lot of them are starting to look at TV and going, yeah, we want to do this. So that's been real interesting. So, yes, Simon, you have your hand up.
Simon, actually, just before we come to you, just to echo that, Alan, I'm doing a screen share again. There's this chart from an Ubiquity study that shows the TV. Simon, you know this chart, right?
Oh yes, I know it very well.
That shows how effective TV advertising is against other media. Yeah, and that you can see that it leads to a 71% profit. It accounts for 54% of budget, profit likelihood of 86%, and an average ROI of 1.73, which is higher than any of the other media that were in that list. Now this was 2018. Things have probably changed in the last couple of years. Yeah, but I don't know how much they would have changed. But again, I'll put. By the way, when I post the video to the website next week, I will put this file underneath the video so that you can download it as well. Simon, you're about to say something. For you.
Yeah, it's linked with both of those. It was what Alan was saying, but just to your point there, the actual chart you didn't show is the one which shows the power of TV as an enabler for mixed media, and that is phenomenal. I mean, we no longer look at media channels in isolation. Everything is looked at in a 360-degree media mix. That's crucial. But to Alan's point, I mean, I think that in the States, there's a couple of things that have happened. One is the upfronts, and now that will be a virtual upfront this year. You know, already I think a number of Disney and CBS have said they're doing a digital upfront, but the upfront has declined. Whereas the scatter market is now a lot stronger, and so that's a short-term scatter market. Plus, with media deflation, and nobody's mentioned media deflation yet, and back to your original figures, I think if you actually apply media deflation to what's going on, television is now available, particularly with the innovations in addressable through Modi, which is a GroupM company, through Sky, AdSmart in the UK, and Freewheel generally elsewhere. You know, all of those have reduced the threshold at which you can afford to go on television.
Yeah.
So I think we've had a lot of brands go on who have been thinking about it, and to Alan's point, have maxed out on their audience penetration, and they need to discover and build new audience.
Yeah. We then get to the big question here, which is, what is this paradox? What is the reason for it? Yeah. Why is viewing going up so much, yeah, and ad revenue going down so much, particularly linear ad revenue? Is it really just as simple as, look, everybody in every industry sector in the economy, more or less, apart from some notable exceptions, have taken a hit, yeah, and therefore their advertising budgets have shrunk, and that's the explanation. Is that it, or is there more to it than that? I mean, it's okay if that is it, yeah, because that would be nice and sort of straightforward, right? It's
far more complicated than that, and you'll need a PhD to develop the media mix models to actually demonstrate it in the econometric modeling.
Alan,
it's very, very complicated.
Alan, you wrote a book. Yeah, what do you think? Yeah,
yeah, it's complicated. I mean, I think, like I said before, I think the initial reaction was to cut back on, oh my God, this is happening. We didn't see it coming. We need to cut back on something. Let's cut back on advertising. Because, like I said before, you don't need to fire anybody, right? We can do this, and it's fungible. And now they're starting to come back and think, okay, like, what should we be doing? Should we be running branding ads, right? So in the States, and I'm sure in Europe too, we've just been through a month of we're there for you, ads, and like, sort of comforting and all that, and people are like, yeah, we get it, you're there for us. Now what? And then there's going to be this period of readjustment of like, okay, how do we do this in a time? And somebody was saying before, how do I get the product to the person if they're not going to the store? So it's, do we have an easy e-commerce way for that to happen? So I do think that ad spending will come back up, but right now, there's also a fear that there's millions of unemployed in both Europe and the US. And are those people going to have money to spend on stuff? So again, we'll start seeing different types of products. We'll take it. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation. I think that's going to be the other big thing that we're going to see, whether it's around addressable and programmatic, whether it's around the types of advertising people do. But this, crises always tend to result in innovation.
Simon, when we first met last year, I remember you telling me that an advert on TV, actually any kind of advert, needs to be seen, there's some metric that it needs to be seen 42 times before somebody becomes a buyer. And I remember it was something like that. And I remember...
Well, no, John Philip Jones would disagree with that. He'll say once is enough.
Really?
At the time, just prior to the point of purchase. It was about recency we were talking.
Okay.
No, I mean, it's effective frequency levels, and it will depend on how good the creative is.
Yeah.
If you've got crap creative, and about 5 or 6 frequency, you get wear out.
Right.
And people start having a negative sentiment to the brand.
My question was about to be that it could, the publishers make a better argument for advertisers to be brand advertising right now rather than results-orientated advertising?
You've got two things. First of all, you've got corporate survival. The business has to survive.
Yeah.
And it may well be the fact that, you know, however strategic the CEO and CFO are, that they just need to get sales, because otherwise they're out of business. That's number one. But if they get that long and short balance, then the investment they would make, and this is the other key point, I think, is where advertisers or where the board of an advertiser sees advertising as a cost, I think they have a serious issue. And this is something that I talk about a lot, both internally and with our clients, because advertising is an investment. And unfortunately, the growth of procurement departments, and I'm not critical of procurement departments, and there's some of them are very, very good, but the normal reaction of a procurement department is to focus on the cost rather than the investment value. But if you invest in the medium and long term, the cost of your brand share and either defending or growing it, and the profit margin you can get on your product when you go through the recovery phase is in an order of ×3 or even ×5 if you haven't invested in your brand equity.
Afterwards,
so,
Simon,
to me, it's a no-brainer.
Simon, afterwards, I'll send you an email asking if you've got any, if you can point us to any studies, any research that talks to that as well. Leon, I'm conscious that we're running out of time. So what do you think in terms of addressing that paradox? What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, I think that you really can't take, I guess, lessons from currently and apply it to what's going to happen in 2021. What I think was really interesting was when Simon was talking about, Sorry,
Leon, you can or you can't take lessons?
You can't. I mean, I think that this is a very kind of unique moment in time, and you can't necessarily kind of expect that things are going to revert back to the norm, but also are going to suddenly continue exactly as is happening today. What I did think was really interesting was kind of Simon's comment on the media deflation, and that's one thing that up until this point we kind of haven't seen across our OTT partners, in that we haven't seen prices come down, and a part of that is we haven't seen kind of money waiting on the sidelines, waiting for that kind of extra price drop in order for them to enter the market. But it will be quite interesting, I think, as we kind of slowly come out of this, whether perhaps we'll start to see more of that as the recovery happens, as new entrants into the kind of into the space, new advertisers are perhaps looking for that price to dip a tiny bit more until they start experimenting. I think in the near term, the kind of price deflation has probably not necessarily benefited, but more real auction-based models, right? If you're Facebook, if you're YouTube, that's probably where you're going to see much more of an impact as a lot of the kind of SMEs exit that, and therefore you have less bid density, and therefore kind of prices come down, and D2C brands can kind of enter in there to try to grab market share with lower pricing. Once you're in the kind of branding space, we haven't seen the immediate impact, but it will be, I'm definitely interested to see if that trend starts to change as time goes on.
Last question from me then, because as I said, we're almost out of time now. Are we looking at for not Q2 and maybe not Q3, but are we looking at a V? Are we looking at a W? I feel like I'm doing a YMCA here. Yeah. Are we looking at sort of snakes? Exactly.
Yeah, I want to be the Indian, please. Sorry, the Native American. Beg your pardon.
You got it. What are your thoughts? I mean, instinctively and also in terms of data. Yeah. What's going to happen? I mean, the Bank of England today, for example, said that it's pretty optimistic. Yeah, I think this is going to be a V, that the economy is going to grow by 15% next year in the UK. Yeah, are we all as optimistic as that? Alan, let's start with you. Get a stateside view.
Okay, so we have something going on in the US. You and I had talked about this. They've been calling it the hammer and the dance. So basically, it's a theory that says that we're a huge country. In different parts of the US over the course of the next year, it's basically until they have a vaccine, are going to, the dances will slowly open up, and the hammer is, infection rates are going up, got to shut it down super quickly. And this is going to be happening asynchronously. In other words, the Midwest may be open, and then all of a sudden the Southeast shuts down. And so that for advertising purposes, you're going to have to be very nimble. Now, Simon, you were talking before, and that's very much the case. Because the upfronts haven't happened, we're focusing much more on the scatter market, which is much more regional. And people are looking, and advertisers saying, no, we need to be able to, if the Midwest shuts down, we need to be able to pull our advertising out within a couple of days and either put new things or put the commitments elsewhere, because we can't, we're not going to be able to run ads saying, hey, come out and play when everybody's under lockdown. So it's going to be very interesting how that all works over the next period. And the other thing that's going on in the U.S. is, like I said before, is that this is a political season. So there's going to be a ton of political advertising on all of the various, whether it's on the FAST, the Flixes, or the local broadcasters. And that's going to take, that's going to help boost the advertising industry slowly. But things are going to be up and down, so I think we'll be seeing a bunch of W's for a while until we actually, have a vaccine.
I just posted your piece, by the way, in the chat area, Alan, that mentions the hammer and dance as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. No, I mean, just to give you some context, I wasn't. Leon?
Yeah, I would kind of expect to see it would be kind of a snake with an upward to the right trajectory. So I expect, you'll see some false starts. I think, simply just because somebody says you can reopen the economy or, reopen the market, it doesn't necessarily mean consumers are going to be comfortable with that. So when cinemas opened in July, or I think that was what I read, View wanted to do, are people actually going to go? So you'll probably see, Simon's shaking his head. So you'll probably see, a bit of spend go in as people try to promote that they're kind of reopening. And then once, their users or people don't follow, you kind of pull back out of the market, which is why I kind of expect to see that, slowly moving up to the right, but definitely with some dips along the way. Not as, barring a second quarantine, which I think then you're into, hard W territory. But if it's just a kind of slow trajectory out of this, then I would say, a kind of snaky up to the right.
And this is specifically for OTT, for BVOD, or?
Yeah, well, this is, I think this is across the board. As I expect, we probably see much less of a decline than other areas. Also the nimbleness of it, the ability to kind of buy, the ability for, new brands, DTC brands who are quite familiar with the buying mechanism, the, way to kind of, work with these partners. It's much simpler for them. So I expect them to kind of almost get those, that first burst will kind of go into the space rather than some of those other channels that require much more planning and kind of less data coming back to you on the back end of it.
Simon, I'll need to limit you to a minute, if that's possible.
Yeah. Very, very quickly. I don't think Leon and I have ever agreed so much on stuff. So you got a first there. When we spoke last week, I thought it was going to be a V. I now think it's going to be a W. I think there will unfortunately be a second round of infection in the October-November period. And the biggest problem of all that we've got, which is completely unforecastable, are politicians. If they let business get on and deal with it, we'll deal with it. But unfortunately, it won't be that. That won't be the case. So I'm afraid, I do think we're going to have a slight recovery, end of Q3 into Q4. We're then going to have a problem, and it's probably going to be the end of Q1 next year, where we hopefully then get a continuous upward trajectory in most countries. The one thing I would say, though, is to agree with Leon completely, is I think the OTT streaming premium video non-linear marketplace is going to have a lot more success in the broadcast area. My colleagues and partners within the broadcast companies, they're working incredibly hard, but that is the tide. They can't push the tide back, and that tide is definitely going out.
Having hogged all the questions, I'm so sorry. I'm only going to give do one question from the audience, which is we're doing a panel in a few weeks' time about kids VOD services, very topical. Yeah, isn't everything at the moment. And Simon, this was directed specifically at you, which is I think you may have read the question already.
I have indeed, from Daniel in Sweden, who I think had to drop off.
Yeah. That's all right. He'll watch the video and then he'll see your answer.
Yeah, we have an enormous amount which we do for specific clients. So obviously that I can't. Those studies I can't discuss. We do also, under our Consumer Study Live panel, have a specific kids element which will be published very shortly. It is unfortunately under embargo, but what I will do is certainly share that with Daniel at the earliest opportunity. I mean, kids viewing patterns are interesting and are changing. And the one thing I would flag up, and my dear friend Mr. Dave Morgan owes me a beer for saying this, is gaming is going to be an incredibly important element in this whole pattern for the kids.
Yeah. All right. I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank the audience and thank you for sticking around. I know we've gone over time. And to our panelists, Simon Thomas of GroupM, Leon Siotis of SpotX, and Alan Wolk of TVREV. Next week, we are talking about content production and content distribution. This is going to be a fascinating conversation because the people that are going to be on the panel, including Endemol Shine, have been talking to me about the demand for their content catalogs in this time where broadcasters need to fill up their schedule. So we're just working out who the other panelists might be, and that's what we're talking about next week. So thank you very much, everyone, and stay safe and see you next time.
Thank you for the invite. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Cheers,
thank
guys.
you. Thank
Bye,
you very
everyone.
much, guys. Take care, guys.
Jimmy,
Stay safe.
Bye.